Hi, everyone. Great to have you here with us. It's me, Steve, with my most favorite buddy, Kevin. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm great, Steve. It's so great to be with you and with everybody else. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's always a great thing. Yeah, and so thank you all for joining us. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit again about relationships. So we, in our previous video, discussed relationships. In our previous meetup that Kevin had at his house in Virginia as well, covered that. And that kind of focused on gender identity and sexual preference, which are very pertinent subjects these days. But we found a couple of things that certainly for the meetup, first of all, we had a schedule change that kind of threw people off, and we had to have it a week earlier than typically we have it in each month. And I know there were some people at least that wanted to be there that couldn't. So that's one reason to continue the subject of relationships. But also there's more subject matter to be mined there. And specifically what we'd like to delve into this time a little bit more, as opposed to the things in the previous video, we'd like to talk a little more about how being on a spiritual path and spiritual growth and awakening can sometimes cause challenges in our interpersonal relationships, whether they be with friends or with partners, family in some cases, all kinds of opportunities for challenge there. And so we'd like to address that. And I guess just to start off with, I can mention that I have in the past had a friend that was I was really close with. Um, we had a lot in common, even in a spiritual domain. But he was a strong Christian, and he was very focused on the biblical interpretation of spiritual perspective, I guess is the way I'd put it, and was rather rigid in that respect. And as I grew in my own spiritual beliefs and perspectives, which are really pretty open-ended, they just didn't mesh well. And this is an example of where we each grew in kind of different directions. And ultimately that relationship, though it wasn't a sudden parting of ways where we had disagreements, we just kind of fell apart and no longer felt that magnetism to be together anymore. And I still see him from time to time, and we enjoy each other's presence, but there's no longer that attraction, that magnetism. So that's an example for me, and I think you have some examples too in your life, don't you, Kevin?
I do, Steve. I had one friendship that was very long term, probably 10 years or more. This was somebody that Rochelle and I traveled with extensively, and I played golf with almost on a weekly basis. But what I found was that he was demanding more and more of my time, and I couldn't provide that to him, and that wasn't really from a spiritual standpoint. It was just from the fact that I had kids and work demands and things like that that kept me from being able to spend as much time with him. He was a little bit older than I was, and towards retirement. But he made a significant and at the time for me very hurtful break where he said he just didn't want to be with me anymore. It was almost like a divorce for me. But in retrospect, as I look back on it, it was actually an ability for me to look inward. I realized that I needed to love myself more, that I needed to rely on the love that I had for myself as opposed to getting it from an external source. But I also found that it gave me an opening to explore more things on my spiritual path. So again, it was very hurtful at the time, but in retrospect, it was very helpful to me, even though, like I said, it was hard to understand that at the time. Similarly, my first marriage was a situation that I helped create, whereby I was doing a significant amount of the work associated with the marriage, and didn't really give myself the freedom to explore things on my own. And that was a relationship that I chose to end, but it was again of necessity, because had I not done that, things probably would have ended poorly for me. And as a result of the ending of that relationship, I found Rochelle, who realized that I had to start moving in a direction of self-love, and really helped me in terms of promoting my spiritual path. Even though she's not spiritual per se, she's very much, she desires for me to find the things in life that make me happy, and my spirituality makes me exceedingly happy, and Rochelle's very happy that I'm happy. And so that has been a blessing to me along that path. And Steve, somewhat similar for you in terms of your marriage and relationship, right?
Yeah, so I've been in my relationship for 35 years. It's my first marriage. And I have to say, early on, as I embarked on my spiritual path, which wasn't really shared with my wife, it was more challenging, and that was partly because I felt that she didn't resonate with that path, but part of it was because I think I kind of forced my perspective on her, that she see that, and so both of us really had to come together and find a common ground, rather than living these separate lives, and ultimately she was able to accept my spiritual path, and I was able to accept her having her own path, which didn't overlap with my spiritual path, but it worked. And we still have a great relationship, and we get along well together, even knowing those differences. So I think for both you and me, Kevin, we both are fortunate to be in relationships with people that we don't share the spiritual path with, yet we get along well with, and it works.
Agreed.
I know there are many situations where it doesn't work and people end up splitting up. So we're
Yeah,
fortunate for that.
we are. I'm very blessed to be in the relationship that I'm in right now. But you're right. I do know a lot of people who agonize over the fact that the spiritual paths are very different. And ultimately, I could envision people headed toward divorce as a result of that.
Yeah. So I think all that being said, we can see that there are a variety of opportunities for relationship challenges. I think you've had them in your family as well,
Mhm.
as I think a lot of people do. Anything else that you care to share along those
Well,
lines?
just that, I think those people that wind up being single in life have a separate challenge, one that's more inwardly focused. And I think part of the reason why uh, they've brought into their experience this single life is to challenge themselves to look at the self-love aspect more. And I think that's an important part. You and I have talked many times about the fact that it's a cornerstone to spiritual growth, is to have that. And perhaps maybe the thing to think about is that if you are single, that perhaps that it's a challenge to you to look at self-love, and to build yourself up before you're ready for that next experience to share with someone else.
Great point. Great point. And I think that in some cases, being in a relationship kind of forestalls that growth that some people need to do.
Yeah.
That you rely on your partner to love you and to show you love, and you don't learn the lesson of loving yourself the way you can when you're single. So there's an
Wow.
advantage to that singularity.
Yeah, great point, Steve. I'm sure every single person would disagree with you, but but I think that's actually the case. I do think, especially for someone who's sensitive and caring, we tend to give to others sometimes before we give to ourselves. And I think you and I've realized that the challenge is to put ourselves first and then to love others, because that's really the proper way of doing things. But it's hard in a relationship situation.
Yeah. So wherever you happen to be, whether it be single or in a relationship, it's serving you well.
It is. It is. Look for the challenge and look for the joy, but they're both there. Yeah. So, Steve, this has
Absolutely.
been great. I think this is a good adjunct to the other video that we did on gender identification, and I really look forward to our discussion in the future with other people. And I hope we get some good feedback from everyone else as to where they stand on the relationship issue, because the other part to this is that supposedly there's an astrological aspect to this whole relationship change around that's going on right now, and either has been going on over the past few years or we're in the midst of it right now. But I've heard a lot about this as being a big part of the shift, and so this has been great to talk about.
Yeah, it is. And I want to welcome anyone and everyone to let us hear your stories or your thoughts about this, because it's a great conversation, and we love to carry it on with anyone and everyone who is willing to partake. So
Yeah.
we look forward to it. Thank you all for being with us, and we look forward to being with you again, both virtually and or in person. So you take care, and we'll see you again soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Love
Bye.
you.
Love you
Bye.
too. Bye.